is apologetic. He's in a better space, of course, than what he was after. People are human, and as humans, sometimes we make mistakes.
The public image of Will Smith may be one of the most carefully protected brands in Hollywood, but some of the people closest to the industry have told a very different story. For decades, the star of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air built a reputation as the safe, funny, universally loved entertainer. Yet two legends of black comedy, Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy, have each said things about him that fans rarely talk about. So what exactly did they reveal about Will Smith? And why do those comments change the way many people see his career and reputation? Join us as we reveal what Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy expose about Will Smith. The origin story that was always missing. Half the truth. Before we get to what Lawrence and Murphy exposed, we need to spend a moment with the version of Will Smith that the world was sold. Will Smith was born in West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His father, Willard Carroll Smith Sr., was a refrigeration engineer and Air Force veteran. His mother, Caroline, was a school board administrator. On the surface, it looked like a stable, middle-class household. Behind closed doors, it was something else entirely. In his 2021 memoir, Will, published with co-author Mark Manson, Will wrote about what defined him more than anything else he ever did on screen or on a stage. Watching his father punch his mother in the head when he was 9 years old. He described her collapsing. He described seeing her spit blood. He wrote about freezing in the moment, being too afraid to intervene, and spending the next 4 decades of his life carrying what he called the shame of being a coward in that room. The entire performance of Will Smith, the warmth, the exuberance, the relentless positivity, the sense that nothing could touch him, was, by his own account, a defense mechanism built by a child trying to make sure his father stayed entertained enough not to hurt anybody. Comedy as survival, the smile as armor. Every room he ever walked into, he was the 9-year-old kid again, reading the temperature, performing to keep the peace. He added, with a darkness most people missed. Years later, when his father had cancer and Will was wheeling him in a wheelchair toward a bathroom, he paused at the top of a staircase. He wrote that he thought about pushing him down. He believed he could make it look like an accident. He wrote that no one would suspect him because he was, in his own words, one of the best actors in the world. He chose not to. His father died in 2016. Now add to that the part of the origin story that was almost entirely invisible until it resurfaced in 2022 after the Oscars slap. In 1989, the same year DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince won the first Grammy ever awarded for Best Rap Performance, Smith was arrested in Philadelphia. Days after the Grammy win, he got into an argument with a record promoter named William Hendricks. According to police reports, Will asked his bodyguard, Charles "Charlie" Mack Alston, to physically attack Hendricks. Hendricks suffered a fractured left eye orbit and required 6 stitches. He reportedly came close to losing sight in one eye. Will was charged with aggravated assault, criminal conspiracy, simple assault, and recklessly endangering another person. The charges were later dropped. He spent a night in a Philadelphia jail cell where, according to an insider, other inmates spent the night waking him up to ask for his autograph. Will has maintained his innocence in the matter ever since. In a 2005 interview, he said, "It wasn't my fault, but the charges were real. They are documented, and they sit in the same archive as every red carpet appearance he ever made." The image of Will Smith as someone who had simply never been involved in violence before the night he walked across the Oscars stage was not accurate. It was always missing this. And then there was the money. At the peak of his early rap career, Will was making millions and spending with the speed of someone who had never been told nice cars, motorcycles, jewelry, an entourage, properties. He admitted in his memoir that he simply did not pay his taxes for 2 full years. Not that he forgot. The IRS assessed a debt of $2.8 million, roughly half of everything he had. They garnished 70% of his salary for the first 3 seasons of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He borrowed $10,000 from a friend who was a drug dealer to fund his move to Los Angeles. He sold everything in Philadelphia and started over. Being famous and broke, he said, is a shit combination. Because you're still famous and people recognize you, but they recognize you while you're sitting next to them on the bus. The Fresh Prince wasn't just a career opportunity. It was the thing that kept him from drowning. The role that turned him into a television icon was, at its origin, a lifeline for a 21-year-old who had blown through a fortune, avoided the federal government, and was being recognized on public transportation while he tried to figure out how to pay back what he owed. That is the actual origin story, the one the brand was built to obscure. So what happens when that 21-year-old, newly famous, deeply in debt, and carrying 30 years of unprocessed trauma, starts exercising power over the people around him? And what happens when the people closest to him are willing to say so? The woman he silenced, and what it cost her. By the time The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air premiered in 1990, Will Smith had a co-star who was, by any objective professional measure, his superior. Janet Hubert was a Juilliard-trained actress and dancer. She had originated the role of Tantomile in the original Broadway production of Cats. She was nominated for an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Actress in a Comedy Series for her work on Fresh Prince in 1991. She was, in the early 1990s, bringing more formal training and craft to that show than almost anyone else in the cast. And she was dark-skinned, which, in the industry landscape of early 1990s network television, already placed her at a structural disadvantage that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with who got to be centered. The friction between Janet and Will became the most defining backstage story in the show's history. By the third season, Janet was pregnant, the sole breadwinner in a household where she was also experiencing domestic abuse, and by her own account increasingly unable to perform happiness on demand for an industry that had given her very little grace. She described withdrawing on set, not being hostile, not being unprofessional, just going quiet. When the show offered her a contract for the next season that reduced her to 10 weeks of work and forbade her from taking any other employment, she declined. The show replaced her with Daphne Maxwell Reid, and then Will Smith, the star, gave an interview to an Atlanta radio station that effectively ended her career in Hollywood. The interview went far enough that Janet believed, and has maintained for nearly 3 decades, that Will used his influence to ensure she didn't work again. The 2020 HBO Max Fresh Prince reunion was the first time Will and Janet sat in the same room since 1993, 27 years. Will cried. He said he horribly underestimated what she was to him. What he did not fully address, and what has never been fully addressed, is the mechanism, not what was said, how it worked. A 21-year-old star with enough leverage at a network to ensure that a Juilliard-trained actress with an NAACP nomination never got another series regular role because he branded her difficult in a radio interview. What Janet described was not a creative disagreement. It was a man discovering, very early in his career, that he had the power to destroy people and choosing to use it. His explanation during the reunion was framed around his own trauma, about the 9-year-old boy performing to keep the peace, about how, if I cut you bad enough, you couldn't respond. That may be true. It may be a genuine explanation for the psychology underneath the behavior, but an explanation of how a weapon was built does not undo the damage the weapon caused. Janet Hubert lost 27 years of her career. That is the documented record. The crying in the reunion special does not erase it. Now take the man who did that to a colleague and add 30 more years of fame, wealth, and the kind of unchallenged power that Hollywood gives its biggest stars, and then watch what happens to the marriage that was supposed to be his anchor, the marriage that was always something else. Will Smith and Jada Pinkett married in December 1997. From the beginning, Jada had told him she didn't believe in conventional marriage. This was not a secret, she was open about it. Her family had modeled non-traditional relationships. She had told him directly. And Smith, who had grown up in a household shaped by the violence and alcoholism of a man he simultaneously worshipped and feared, wanted the marriage anyway. In his memoir, he describes pressuring Jada into a traditional wedding when she would have been satisfied with something simpler and more honest about what they actually were. He writes that the decision to buy a 256-acre compound in Southern California over her explicit objection, a property she never wanted, became, in his own words, a down payment on discord. He knew as he made it that it was wrong. He made it anyway. For years, the marriage was described to the public in language that was technically accurate but functionally misleading. They used phrases like life partnership. They said their relationship was not traditional. In 2013, Jada wrote on Facebook, Will and I both can do whatever we want because we trust each other to do so. This does not mean we have an open relationship. This means we have a grown one. That statement has aged in a very particular way, because by 2020, the full picture had arrived. In June 2020, singer August Alsina gave an interview on The Breakfast Club and disclosed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Jada Pinkett Smith, and that Will Smith had given him his blessing to pursue it. Within 2 weeks, Will and Jada sat together on her Facebook watch show Red Table Talk and confirmed the relationship. Jada described it as an entanglement. Will pressed her to call it what it was. It was a relationship, she said. August Alsina had been introduced to the family through Jaden Smith. He was 22 when the relationship began. Jada was 43. Alsina was also, at the time, suffering from autoimmune liver disease and had come to lean on the Smith family for support. In October 2023, Jada gave an interview to Hoda Kotb that contained a detail that reframed the entire narrative. She disclosed for the first time publicly that she and Will had actually been separated since 2016, 7 years earlier. They had been living separately, presenting as a married couple, maintaining the brand, and neither one had disclosed it. When asked why, she said they just weren't ready yet, and that they were still trying to figure out how to present it to the world. The Oscars slap happened in 2022, 6 years into a separation the public didn't know about. The image of Will Smith protecting his wife at the Oscars, acting from love and hurt and loyalty, was performed on behalf of a woman he had been formally separated from for 6 years. In his GQ November 2021 cover story, Will went further and confirmed that Jada's relationship with August Alsina was not the only extramarital involvement either of them had had. The marriage that had been presented as unconventional but monogamous, a grown relationship, not an open one, was, in documented reality, something neither one of them had ever fully told the truth about in public. The brand required the marriage to look a certain way. The brand won, every time. And then came Chris Rock's Netflix special, then Eddie Murphy at the Golden Globes, and the people who had been in the same rooms as Will Smith, who knew him, had been close to him, had affection for him, said things in public that the brand had no answer for, the revelation that had been hidden for years. On March 4, 2023, Chris Rock performed a live Netflix special at the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore, Jada Pinkett Smith's hometown. The title was Chris Rock: Selective Outrage. He waited until the final 10 minutes to address the slap that had defined the previous 12 months of public conversation. When he did, he was precise, unsparing, and systematically correct about the facts in a way that left no room for reframing. Will Smith practices selective outrage, Chris said. He described calling Will after the entanglement became public and offering his condolences, and Will not answering the phone. He said Jada boycotting the Oscars in 2016 because Will didn't get nominated for Concussion was the beginning of a sequence of events that Will had simply redirected at him. He also revealed that the slap had nothing to do with a joke about alopecia, that it was Will's displaced rage over a marriage that had publicly humiliated him. She hurt him way more than he hurt me, Chris said. Everybody in the world called him a bitch. I tried to call the motherfucker and give him my condolences, and he didn't pick up for me. Everybody called that man a bitch. They called his wife a predator. And who does he hit? Me, a person he knows he can beat. That last observation is the one that landed differently than the rest. Rock was pointing out something that had gone largely unremarked upon, that in a room that included the person Chris had identified as the actual source of Smith's humiliation, Will chose to walk onto a stage and hit the comedian, not the man who had the relationship with his wife, the safest available target. Chris's framing that this was the act of someone managing their violence carefully and directing it at the path of least resistance was a specific kind of accusation, and he made it into a live Netflix special to the entire world. Then there is Eddie Murphy. His moment was quieter. It arrived at the 80th Annual Golden Globes on January 10, 2023, where Murphy was being honored with the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Career Achievement, one of the most prestigious lifetime recognitions in Hollywood. He stood at the podium and told the room he was going to share the definitive blueprint for achieving success, longevity, and peace of mind in this industry. 3 things. Very simple. He had followed it his entire career. Pay your taxes, he said, pausing for effect. Mind your business. Another pause. And keep Will Smith's wife's name out of your mouth. The room, which included Will Smith's industry, his colleagues, his peers, and his entire professional world, laughed. And the laughter was not just at the joke, it was recognition. Because every person in that room knew all three of those things were things Will Smith had failed to do. He had failed to pay his taxes at the beginning of his career and had the IRS seize his possessions. He had not minded his business. He had used his power over the years to influence careers, to manage narratives, to control what got said publicly about his household. And he had, in the most watched moment in awards show history, walked onto a stage and made his wife's name the center of an international incident. Eddie Murphy had taken all three of those failures and wrapped them into a single sentence delivered as career advice in front of the entire industry on a night celebrating his own legacy. Backstage afterward, Murphy told reporters it was all love. He said he loved Will and Chris, but the joke was not constructed from love. It was constructed from precision. A man who had watched Will Smith for 30-plus years, knew the full arc of the story, understood what the original three failures said about the pattern, taking that pattern and compressing it into a punchline at the biggest industry event of the year, while everyone who mattered was watching. Martin Lawrence, for his part, has remained publicly loyal to Will throughout all of it, calling him a ride or die and tower of strength. But even in the Bad Boys reunion interviews, observers noted that something appeared off with Martin, that the man who once matched Smith's energy beat for beat seemed distant. So who is Will Smith when you take away the brand? When you remove the Grammy performances, the movie grosses, the Jaden and Willow social media posts, the carefully curated image of a healthy, progressive, evolved man who figured out how to be both? What is actually left? The Oscars, the apology, and the gap between them. On March 27, 2022, Will Smith walked across the stage of the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles during the 94th Academy Awards and slapped Chris Rock across the face on live television. Rock had made a joke comparing Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head to G.I. Jane. Will returned to his seat and from there shouted twice, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." 30 minutes later, he won the Best Actor Oscar for King Richard. He accepted it with tears and a speech about love and protecting people. Later that night, he was photographed at an after-party, visibly joyful, dancing with the Oscar to his own music. The Academy allowed him to remain at the ceremony. They gave him a standing ovation. The room chose, in real time, to reward the violence. The fallout was slow to arrive. Will resigned from the Academy the following week. In April 2022, the Academy banned him from all events for 10 years. He posted an apology video in July 2022 that disclosed he had reached out to Chris and that Chris was not ready to receive that call. "I'm here whenever you're ready to talk," he said. That framing, the perpetrator setting the reconciliation on the victim's timeline, told a story about how Will understood his own position in the dynamic. The apology also notably did not include the person Rock had said was actually at the center of the conflict. It did not address the entanglement. It did not address the 7-year separation. It did not address the way the marriage had been presented publicly versus what it actually was. It apologized for the slap, framed as an isolated action disconnected from the circumstances that had produced it. Chris addressed those circumstances 11 months later in Baltimore, in front of a live streaming audience of millions. Smith did not watch the special himself, but received a summary from people who did. His representatives confirmed he was embarrassed and hurt by what Chris said. He had not apologized to Chris in person by that point. Chris's representatives confirmed that Chris said what he needed to say and did not require any reaction in return. What the sequence of events produced was something that the brand could not absorb cleanly. The gap between the public story and the actual record had become too wide to paper over. The man who had built an industry on being the safest, most beloved, most palatable version of black excellence in American entertainment history, the man who had been chosen to host the Fresh Prince reunion, to carry the Emancipation Prestige Project, to stand at the center of the Bad Boys franchise into his 50s, had hit a comedian on live television in front of a room that gave him a standing ovation and then spent the following 2 years managing the narrative of it rather than reckoning with it. And the reckoning, when it finally arrived, came from the peers who had watched him the longest. Was the Will Smith the world admired ever the real man, or just the version Hollywood wanted us to believe in? And after everything that's happened, can Will Smith ever fully rebuild the trust that made him one of Hollywood's safest stars? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.